I'm going to be talking today about language varieties in online materials and how sometimes these online materials do not address the varieties of language, and not just geographically varieties of language, but also different groups, different status that may be important for our learners. I'm going to play a little dialogue, and I would like you to think about what is authentic about this dialogue, what is not authentic about this dialogue. And for those parts that may not seem so authentic, why do you think it's not authentic? And how would you change it to make it a little bit more authentic?
Hi, how are you doing?
That's better.
How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for asking.
No problem. So, how have you been?
I've been great. What about you?
I've been good. I'm in school right now.
What school do you go to?
I go to PCC.
Do you like it there?
It's okay. It's a really big campus.
Good luck with school.
Thank you very much.
We don't speak in complete sentences in conversations all the time, right? It seems that if someone knows you enough to speak like this, why they don't know how to you go to school? In natural conversations, there are overlap over people's speaking, there's pauses, there's silences. If someone wants to get out of this conversation really fast, why going all the way to the end, right? Like you were pointing out. And this I took from, you can see that site link there, an eslfast.com. So how can we improve this little dialogue to make it a little bit more authentic? So we could definitely have people actually meet and record it, and not just two people, many different people, and see how people actually greet each other when they meet. Different types of people, friends, people that know each other, people that don't know each other, different empowering people. So adding different types of pragmatics. So we are going to address a little bit some of these issues today of how to include a variety of, in this case would be Englishes, but it could be different varieties of the language that you're teaching, and also different pragmatic uses of the language. So the main issue is that usually most of our materials do not represent the way that L2 speakers speak. Not only they are fake in the way that people do conversations, like we were saying, dialogues, people don't speak in full sentences, most of the time. But also the varieties of language that are included are not very authentic. Sometimes the input is very impoverished. So we have dialogues that are extremely short and not realistic at all. Also in authentic practices, most of the times there is no sense of what goes around a dialogue. What do people do before the dialogue? Are they kissing in the cheek? Are they bowing? What are the pragmatics that come around the dialogues? What are the practices that come connected with those dialogues? Also, most of the materials are restricted to a geographical area. There's usually a prestige L2 that we are teaching. It could be a mix of prestigious L2s, or it could be one subgroup of that L2 that we are studying. So if we think of English, usually Cockney English is not in most of the books, or the language of subgroups that are not considered prestigious language, right? And a lot of times there's also no lexical information about important subgroups for our learners. So if our learners are gonna hang up with young people on the streets rollerblading or roller skating, then there's certain language that they need. And most of the materials never address these subgroups language. So I have in black the 6 problems that usually come up on the materials. And this scenario would be Ana is from the US and goes with her Colombian friend Alberto to visit Alberto's mother. And there's this dialogue, although it was translated from Spanish. So the mother says, Ana, would you like some cake? And Ana says, yes, thank you. And then the mother turns around to Alberto and whispers, what? They don't fear her over there? This dialogue by itself makes no sense, right? We don't know if the mother is rude. We don't know if she's conveying sarcasm. We don't know anything because we are deployed of the cultural values around it, right? In a Spanish-speaking countries, you do need to reject the first time that you are offered something. Otherwise, you are considered impolite or rude. The person will always offer you a second time and then you accept. So a dialogue like this makes no sense whatsoever for students without the pragmatic knowledge. So Naoko is learning English at the University of Portland, where she runs into John, a British student in her class. John says, hi, you're in Mr. Locke's class, right? And Naoko says, yes, you too. Do you like the class? And John says, teacher is nice, but he talks 19 to the dozen. And then Naoko looks puzzled because she is learning English in Portland. It's kind of British. Yes, it is British English. Excessive talking. There we go. Someone, Ashley, yes, answer. It means to talk really fast. So it's talking 19 to 12, let's say. So it means to talk really, really a lot and really fast. So probably Naoko has never been exposed to idioms in other varieties of English because in the US, we tend to teach United States English, right? If you study Spanish in Colombia, most likely you will learn the Spanish that is used in Colombia. This is from a real case, actually, and this was happening in a Spanish class. The teacher says, today we're going to learn past tense, and the teacher writes the conjugation of the past tense in the board, already horrible, but one student raises the hand and says, teacher, the book has one more verb. What is this, vosotros? And the teacher says, oh, don't worry, only Spaniards use vosotros. You don't need to learn it. What is the problem here? There we go, exactly. Excludes a whole geographical area. So it is important to be as inclusive as possible. And we know that for some languages, it's a lot more difficult because there's a lot of sub-varieties of the language. So the ideal would be to have materials that incorporate real, authentic language, a variety of geographical areas, different communities of language, different practice, etc. The reality is that's too much content, right? We can't include every subgroup, every community of speaking of every possible variety of the language. So then we come to the problem is what we choose, which one we choose. And the moment we choose, we are making a statement also on what is the preference for language, right? So a possibility is to use different varieties, but this can be also confusing. So if I am using vosotros sometimes in Spanish, then I'm using ustedes, then the students cannot figure out which is which, right? And also if we give lexical variety for every word, every idiom that we use in classes will last forever on a sentence, right? That's the reality. It's not possible to do all of these things. So what can we do? Some possible solutions, since I guess this is my job here. One would be to conduct a needs analysis to find out what geographical areas would the students will use in their L2. If we know where their students will be interacting with the speakers of that language, that could somehow narrow down what varieties we want to include in class. And also what communities of language will they be including? If we have students that are only going to do study abroad in Jordania, then we know what kind of language they need, in what community they need, and what are they gonna do with that language? Is it for academic purposes? Are they gonna be working? Is it just for vacationing? And also we would have to figure out what kind of language is needed in that context, in that community. Important to remember that we cannot target everybody's needs 100%. We will always have someone in the class that has a different need than everybody else. But at least what we can do is narrow down that huge amount of variety content that we would have otherwise. The other solution is to include activities periodically, so often in the class through the curriculum, that emphasize language variety and pragmatic issues. So not to dedicate our own whole curriculum, but when we do an activity, at the same time that we do that activity, we may want to vary the type of language that we are using in that dialogue or in that activity, and talk to the students about what variety this is, who uses this variety, in what community, for what purpose. This would allow us to at least raise language awareness from the students. That is, to actually be looking at the language thinking, oh, well, you know, where is this from, right? I don't understand this word, but maybe it's not from the English that I know. And also raise cultural and socio-pragmatic awareness, right? Okay, this dialogue looks familiar, but I don't know all of these words. Well, maybe they are politeness markers, right? What are these things? And also we could include it targeting different language skills. So it's not just listening to people that speak differently, but adapting our speaking to people that talk differently from what we have learned. And of course, this is a way of engaging students in learning by doing. That is, getting them used to actually think about language as something much more fluid than what it is in the textbook. So some examples of activities that could be incorporated in the classroom, and these are just 3 examples that I could think of. Each of these I have separately in 2 steps, step 1 and step 2, but could also be level 1 and level 2. So for lower level students, they could just complete the first step, and for more advanced students, then they could also do the second step. One activity that I like refers to using dialogues in videos that are already existing. So lots of movies have interesting dialogues that, although they're not super authentic, because again, a lot of people don't overlap with people on movies because we need to understand them. At least they latch to each other's sentences, and they're a little bit more realistic than what we can find in most textbooks. So this activity, the main objectives are to raise awareness over language variation, to practice listening to different varieties of L2, and it addresses the interpretive and the interactional mode. And the activity is using Edpuzzle as a tool. I don't know if you know Edpuzzle, some of you, but it allows to create questions over videos. And if the video in this case has a variational content in it, it can be used for that. So the first step would be teacher creates a video and invites the students from within the program to watch and answer questions about the varieties of L2. And I'm going to click in this link. Okay, so this is a tool, it's called Edpuzzle. It's a really simple way to create questions attached to videos.
After all, it's the same language, but actually there are quite a few differences. The most obvious one is pronunciation. For example, can you tell where these characters are from? The United States, Britain, or Australia? Hi, how you doing?
All right, there seems to be a common idea. So I could submit this question, and this question gets submitted to the teacher.
Sometimes the British use different letter order too. British.
I'm going to stop it here so that you don't get too bored with the video. So you get the idea. You could create a video with as many questions as you want, targeting a topic on variety in your L2. But even more interesting would be that the students themselves create those videos. So teacher can select a group of videos and place those videos in the teacher's classroom. You can create a classroom for your students, and then you can ask students to actually listen to the videos, think about variety and whatever the content is about, and have them create the questions. And then those videos can be seen by the rest of the students in the class, and the students can answer those videos too. So it's extra practice for them. Working collaboratively, if students can do that in groups, even better, because then a lot more interactional language practice happens, and we know how important it is, the negotiation of language, the use of the L2 for developing that language. So if it can be done in the L2, great. And if it can be done collaboratively, excellent. And that would be extra practice. This other activity, interactional variation in dialogues, has the same objectives, but also to develop socio-pragmatic and pragmalinguistic awareness about the L2. That is how people talk to other people differently depending who that person is, what the purpose of the conversation is, what the context is, etc. And this can be done with any comic creation program. I have used here Tundu, and it works a little bit like the first activity. In the first step, the teachers would create a comic strip which will illustrate a pragmatic act that requires the understanding of different social norms and the language necessary to do these social norms correctly in the L2. And then this strip could be included in a lesson about socio-pragmatics, or how people, you don't need to use the word socio-pragmatics, it's very scary for students, but how people actually interact and how it's different for different types of people. So this would be for greetings, and it's different if you greet an older person, someone your age, your boss. The students can actually go back in here and they can modify this dialogue. So here, if you click let others redo, the students could actually redo this, save it on the, under their name, and they can send it to you for feedback. The second step, or the second level, would be similar to the other activity. Students collaboratively would work in creating the comic strips themselves, and you can give each group a different speech act. So someone could do requests, apologies, invitation, and this of course has to do a lot with what L2 you're teaching, because invitations may be very, very similar to the L1, or they may be very different. So targeting those cross-cultural speech acts that are very different helps raising awareness about that difference. And then the students would share their comic strips. So with the other students, the teacher could create a gallery. And if we want to add a comparisons mode, for example, they could write around the gallery also, what is the difference? Why is it used different in the L2 and the L2? So that would be a language comparison. And the last activity that I would suggest would be also to work together the lexical variation and the pragmatic variation. And these main objectives would be to engage a student in fast retrieval of vocabulary. So this makes students think about their knowledge gap. When you present the question, they don't know the answer. They know that they don't know the answer. So this is good for going back and look at those things that we don't know. And also it's a game, so we know that a motivational factor that makes activities fun, it's important. In this case, I chose Kahoot because it allows for either video or pictures also. So if we wanna do some pragmatic acts. And the first, again, in 2 levels, so 2 steps. The first step, the teacher creates a Kahoot for the students to play. And the game can be played all at once, like we're going to do right now. This Kahoot can be used at a later time as an assessment also. And as a second step, students would also create their own Kahoots and have the rest of the class play those Kahoots. So all they have to share is the link to that Kahoot for the other students to play. Go to kahoot.it, and now it's going to come up with a number on the screen, which is what you would have to put under the pin. You also need to enter a nickname for yourself. So you will see a question on your screen, and then you will see 4 colors that correspond to the answers on the bottom of the screen. All you have to do is click or touch on the color with the right answer. All right, here comes next question. In what country are you if you hear the phrase, we're having a right old knees up? In England. Okay, so you can see a little bit how you can use Kahoot to get students involved in learning a little bit of variety or as much as you want on variety. These were quite simple questions. So mainly, I think the idea is of including variation is to get students comfortable with the idea that variation exists, that people talk differently in different groups, in different communities, in different countries, and we cannot learn all of them, but students can actually learn to observe people, how they interact, observe the context where they interact, retrieve what they know about language, and then ask expert speakers how people talk, when do they do, why do they do, with whom do you do this and you don't do this. So basically, since we cannot include everything about variation in our materials, the idea is to make students aware that variation exists. Teach them some examples, show them how this variation is not just for language, but also for social norms, and allow them to have that tool when they need to use the language. And I'll stop here.